you can get there from here. Where the roads are winding, the stories are crazy, and maps don't mean a thing. So grab your boots and saddle up, we are chasing tales untamed. From haunted mines to mountain pines, no two roads are the same. The compass spins, the banjo grins, we ride where legends claim. On the Can't Get There From Here podcast, where truth wears a crooked wing. Can't get there.
Hey, folks, welcome to the Can't Get There From Here podcast, which is a podcast where me and my friends get together, and when we aren't plotting sabotage of our eventual digitized overlord, we spread propaganda regarding exactly how bad artificial intelligence is when it comes to writing historical documentaries. I'm your host, Canny Bellingham, and joining me is Warren Reed, who is in charge of our Gaydar surveillance. How's it going today, Warren?
Oh, it's all fabulous at the moment, Kenny. I wish I could say that my Gaydar is up and running sharp, but, lately I can't seem to find anyone but me and, I don't know, maybe Lindsey Graham. I mean, you don't need much Gaydar to find him, so.
Well, Warren, my Gaydar's been shot for years, but even if I can pick that one out.
Yeah.
And also joining me is our Marshal Commander, overseeing our still developing cavalry and all things small town and snowy, Nikki Maynard. Nikki, how many horses have you managed to amass so far, and how close to death are any of them?
Well, including the one my mom wants to buy, one. Winter is hard for amassing a cavalry, I'll have you know. However, the one that I do have is worth two, since she's a red mare and she is ready for spring. All dragon snorts and tail flagging farts and all. It is remarkable.
Well, good deal. I'm sure the farts will work well for melee combat situations. Folks, along with marshaling troops and horses, Nikki also runs a horse hospice, or horspice, if you will.
No freaking truer words have ever been spoken. Nick is going to have to make me a sign, a hospice sign for my barn. I need it, and I deserve it.
I was trying to come up with a catty one-liner, even like along the lines of like horspice and vinegar, but I just think that the whole thing is just awesome. So.
Oh, I don't know, Warren. I can't help but wonder if Nikki, who is a self-professed horror movie aficionado, just enjoys watching horses die. I just hope she isn't a student of Dr. Kevorkian.
No, that is not how that
works. Oh, well, I guess there's that, but yeah.
With the introductions done, Warren, will you do the honors of telling our listeners what we are reviewing today?
Well, Kenny, this time we're wading into the liturgy of fear and a spine-chilling story that blends desperation, blind religion, and the horrors of the American healthcare system. And no, it's not coming from this morning's news report.
Oh, well, maybe I should be glad of that. And Nikki, how would you describe this shockumentary if you were an alien who was visiting our planet for the first time?
Brains. I want brains. Oh, wait. That's the wrong movie. Maybe Dr. Giggles references. Maybe. Better yet, this hits very similar to the H.H. Holmes story and about the murder castle. That's closer.
Yeah, it really does echo that story, which we will one day tackle on this channel, I hope. Okay, in homage to what is often heard in these AI-authored videos, I need to ask our listeners to tell me in the comments, not where they are right now as they listen to us be ridiculous and silly, but where and when they wish they were while they listen to this video. Also, remember that there's a like button, a subscribe button, and there's also a close window button. Please refrain from touching the last of those buttons, at least until you reach the end of the video. But the other buttons are safe to use and won't cause either myself or my co-hosts to melt into puddles of self-loathing and misery.
Mm. I, for one, like the share button because we all know that sharing is caring.
Ah,
Mm-hmm.
And if I were to leave a comment like you described, Kenny, I'd choose listening to this record while cruising on the Mars rover at 2 a.m. And the last bit that you discussed remarkably sounds like, please keep your hands and feet inside the vehicle until it comes to a full stop. I.e.,
Mm.
please hit the button so we don't melt into self-loathing piles of goo. Same thing.
yep. Well, this video begins by establishing location and time, which is always an important thing to do in any documentary. We are taken to March of 1891 in Boston's North End, where city officials break the locks on St. Mercy General Hospital's basement morgue. There, they discovered 213 patient files, each marked with a note that said, quote, called to glory during sacred treatment, unquote. You, the listener, will hear this phrase repeated several times during this video.
Already I'm thinking that at some point they probably should have just had one of those stamps made so they wouldn't have to write that phrase over and over and over again.
Clearly.
Yeah.
We are told that 213 deaths were not what made these files terrifying, but that the symptoms preceding the deaths, which didn't match any known illnesses of that era. And I must agree with this assessment because 213 deaths in 16 years at a hospital seems rather low for that era, when there was no penicillin and medicine usually incorporated carpenter tools and literal snake oil. According to Google, quote, based on 19th century hospital data and mortality trends, city hospitals in the early 1890s experienced high mortality rates, often ranging from 40 to 70% for specific severe infectious diseases cases. So the odds of leaving a city hospital alive back then were around 50-50.
Especially since entering a hospital in the middle of a post-industrial revolution city was essentially just sinking yourself into a giant petri tub of bacterial infection.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
However, the Catholic diocese decided that that's easy for me to say, statistics needed to be covered up, of course.
I wonder what else the Catholic diocese like to cover up and what notes might be in those files. Asking for a friend.
One can only wonder.
Hmm.
However, they were foiled in this attempt, because investigators copied documents and revealed a pattern that would challenge everything the Irish immigrant community believed about divine healing. I have a feeling, though, that the Irish community would quickly find a way to remain steadfast in their beliefs.
Always after me rosary you are.
Oh, and at this point in the video, the narrator feels the need to warn the listeners that their video is only for, quote, the bravest souls who dare to explore the darkest corners of America's religious history, unquote. So, while our listeners gird their loins and fortify their survival bunkers, we're going to take a short break for some fluff and nonsense before we return to review 213 victims in 16 years, what really happened at St. Mercy General Hospital.
I am so excited to see how horrifying what is so horrifying that needs a warning label from the narrator. I mean, I've lived for this stuff. House of a Thousand Corpses can't have anything on this, and this is a whole channel devoted for the denizens of horror. This is awesome.
Hello, my name is Cooney Bellingham, and I'm the one who sits in the background doing the recordings and the editings, the final cuts before I upload it to this channel. I take my role very seriously and strive to produce only the cleanest record I'm capable of producing. As you may have noticed in our previous video, there were a couple times when the host called edit and started over repeating exactly what they had started to say before. Those edits were supposed to be cut. I have no one to blame but my wife.
What?
Yes, my wife normally will smack me on the head or stuff me into a closet when I screw up.
I do not.
You used to, back when our love was still fresh.
Oh my God.
But she now just lets me know when I mess up and takes no responsibility at all for the mistakes I make.
Oh, no, hang on.
I'm not sure that I will be able to reform her wayward ways, but in the future I'll make sure that dirty socks are within reach, which she can stuff in my mouth before locking me in the closet.
I am going to kill you.
Promise?
And we're back. Now that our listeners are equipped with full tactical gear, our distinguished sounding narrator tells us that this story took place in 1874. A surge of immigration from Ireland following the potato famine and poor economic conditions common among disadvantaged people across Europe brought thousands of people pursuing hope. A significant number of Irish Catholics landed in Boston, Massachusetts, and chose to stay where factory work was available.
Out of curiosity, I did a quick search and found a few prominent gentlemen whose lineage actually hails from Ireland. You want to know who? None other than former President Joe Biden, current Vice President J.D. Vance, and our aforementioned scallywag, Lindsey Graham. Imagine that directly descended from immigrants fleeing famine for a better life abroad.
Huh. Well, look at that. A guy fucker, a couch fucker, and just all-around general motherfucker all came from Ireland. Okay, and they only arrived here and collectively labor towards the nation's decline and eventual downfall, while denying refuge to any who need it.
Ireland could be like those memes on social media where Canada is apologizing for Justin Bieber over again.
As they should. Anyway, we are introduced to three characters in the same sentence. Dr. Charles Whitman, Sister Margaret O'Connor, and Chaplain Robert Sullivan. And they promised, quote, to open St. Mercy General Hospital as a beacon of divine healing for God's forgotten children, unquote. In 1874, over a 3-month period, they converted a 3-story former textile warehouse into a medical facility. Anyway, we are introduced to three characters in the same sentence. Dr. Charles Whitman, Sister Margaret O'Connor, and Chaplain Robert Sullivan promised they would, quote, open St. Mercy General Hospital as a beacon of divine healing for God's forgotten children, unquote. In 1874, over a 3-month period, they converted a 3-story former textile warehouse into a medical facility. So, right away, we are expected to believe that a doctor, a nun, and a chaplain did not walk into a bar, but actually turned a brick building into a hospital. Given the offense that will be revealed later in the narrative, we must conclude that they would have done all of this work themselves or had forced any hired laborers and contractors to sign rock-solid NDAs, or alternatively murdered them at the conclusion of their work.
Having done a half-assed kitchen remodel myself, I will say that perhaps if the story had begun with them starting this project and opening the hospital maybe 20 years later, I might roll with it a little better, but 3 months, I don't know about that.
Yeah.
We are given a description of the layout of the hospital, complete with a reception area, a chapel, patient rooms, and quote. But it was the basement that would become the source of nightmares. A series of rooms that they called sacred treatment chambers, where they claimed the most miraculous healings would take place.
Ugh. Basements and attics. This is why I thank God every day my house has neither. I figure if there's going to be nefarious things happening, I want them being done right there in the kitchen where everyone can witness it.
Not sure if I agree with that, Warren, but you do you.
And agreed. I'm not sure I want blood on the ceiling while I'm eating my morning Cheerios. And
Oh, we are given a long description of his two accomplices. Dr. Whitman showed proof of his education from the University of Edinburgh,
Mm.
specializing in experimental therapeutics blessed by divine guidance. I was unaware that this was a field of medical college had on offer. Physically, he was, quote, a tall, gaunt man in his 50s with piercing blue eyes and prematurely white hair that he kept meticulously groomed. His hands were always impeccably clean, and he wore a small silver cross on his lapel. Details that made desperate families trust him implicitly, unquote.
Mhm. Clean hands and a lapel cross. Yeah, that's pretty much all I need to trust my life to somebody.
and Sister Mary O'Connor presented as a genuine Catholic nun, not a sexy nun, but complete with the traditional habit and rosary beads that never left her side, unquote. Are rosary beads known for just wandering off?
You know?
She had, she had a soft Irish accent, which comforted frightened patients with whispered prayers and gentle touches.
Mhm.
I think that those whispered prayers and gentle touches maybe did not always offer comfort to people as much as they'd like us to believe.
I agree. However, yelling and slaps might have given the game away. Chaplain Sullivan was a robust man with a booming voice, conducting services that could be heard 3 blocks away, guys. He drew
Hmm.
crowds of hundreds to listen to his sermons about divine healing, and his blessing ceremonies became legendary throughout the Irish Quarter.
3 blocks is like a third of a mile. So, I
Hmm.
mean, without the use of a megaphone and competing with the sounds of an industrial city, if I could hear that from 300 feet, I'd guess I'd probably head on down there too, be only to see what the holy hell was going on.
Yeah. And for gamers out there, that would be the ultimate STFU moment if there ever was
Right.
one. Because if you know, you know.
Yep.
Um, Word spread of the miraculous healing of the ill-fated patients. So those who should have died were healed. Treatments were free, paid by anonymous, generous benefactors, and we hear from the bigots, quote, even skeptical Protestant newspapers acknowledged that something remarkable was happening at St. Mercy, though they attributed it to the powerful effects of faith and the suggestion on the immigrant mind. Unquote.
Ugh. Of course, it's the Protestants trash talking the Catholics again. The orange and the grain they're at it again. I'm thinking like, couldn't they just leave their silly rivalry back on the shores of the Emerald Isle before they came over?
No
Just get along,
kidding.
everybody.
Ugh. By 1876, the hospital's reputation had spread so far that it was treating 200 patients per month. That seems low to me, but and it had a waiting list of several weeks long. Families would camp out on the cobbles outside the hospital in hopes of getting family members medical and spiritual attention.
Oh, Kenny, do you remember this? This made me remember the lines of people that we would see when we were kids camping on the sidewalk outside Carousel Music, so they could be the first ones to get tickets to whatever big arena concert was coming. So, like,
Hmm.
someone would have their boombox with them playing like Led Zeppelin or the Rolling Stones or something at full blast. I think
Uh-huh.
it was probably just like that, only with choir hymns.
I had forgotten that. Remember how many batteries those boom boxes needed? I think it was around 10 D batteries, and they would go dead before the first cassette was finished.
No, the whole thing weighed like 300 pounds.
Oh, God,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. It kind of reminds me of the Black Friday sales too.
Eh,
Hmm.
But alas, back to the story.
yes.
It was at this point that Dr. Whitman implemented the selection process he called divine guidance, whereby he prayed over each application and accepted only those patients whom God had revealed were ready for healing.
I'm getting Peter Popoff vibes here. For those of our listeners who are unfamiliar with Peter Popoff, first, welcome back from the coma. And second, he's a televangelist who was exposed for fraud on national television on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. He was subsequently sued, but continues today to scam the desperate faithful with promised healings in exchange for nonstop monetary donations. And at least Dr. Whitman isn't asking the desperate poor of Boston for money. He had other things in store for the vulnerable faithful.
I'm actually scared to ask how many of the listeners even know who Johnny Carson is,
Oh,
but
God.
yeah, I know. I'm starting to think that in the house of Dr. Whitman, free is just another word for something else to lose.
Mhm.
And my parents made sure the adage "nothing is ever free" was driven deep into my soul from a very young age. That my husband says I'm critical or cynical and
Uh-huh.
cruel, but I don't think so.
Yep. Of course, all of these successes attracted the attention from the rest of the medical community. So, when a doctor from Massachusetts General Hospital asked to witness one of these medical procedures, he was politely refused because, quote, divine healing required pure faith unmarred by scientific skepticism, unquote. When doctors would insist on knowing the process, Dr. Whitman would only say, quote, that he combined traditional medical knowledge with sacred rituals passed down through generations of faithful healers. He claimed his medications were purified through prayer and blessed through during holy ceremonies, making them far more effective than ordinary pharmaceuticals, unquote.
It's the equivalent of selling snake oil, and there are so many movies that make references to this.
Mm.
One in particular, there were a couple that I have to choose from, but one in particular was A Million Ways to Die in the West. After Anna and Albert are like, I love them. After Anna and Albert are lured in by a sales pitch from the salesman, Anna says, "God, look at these ingredients: cocaine, alcohol, morphine, mercury with chalk, and red flannel." Had this story been written about people looking at what was being touted just a wee bit closer, like Anna did, we probably wouldn't be discussing this right now.
Well, imagine a person in authority eschewing proven scientific research and instead advocating quackery for the sick masses. I mean, I
Mhm.
shudder to think that something like that could happen today.
Oh, God. Yeah. RFK. Anyway.
AJ Sharp.
Oh, Dr. Oz. Don't worry, Warren. I'm sure all of those anti vaxxers did their own research and will be just fine.
Mhm.
Anyway, the first time that the prospective patients at their families were given a clue that not everything was going swimmingly at St. Mercy's Hospital happened when a stinky child emerged from the basement walking like a wind-up toy, as described by one witness. The child's body was stiff and tense, her fists clenched so tight that her fingernails had drawn blood. The child was babbling in an unknown language, and when Dr. Whitman scooped her up, explaining to the witnesses staring in shock while standing in the waiting area that she was just experiencing divine visions. No problem here. No, never mind. The narrator says his words were reassuring to the witnesses, but his visual panic should have caused at least a few of them to tell their loved ones, let's go.
Well, and after the weird chanting and the stench and the quote otherworldly guttural sounds of her voice, what haunted one witness's dreams for decades was, what was it? The child's black fingernails. I mean, I realized that the goth fashion phase hadn't hit yet, but they did talk about how filthy she was, and I think that even though the black fingernails were definitely creepy, they kind of just gave us a laundry list of WTF details that would populate a hell of a lot more dreams for most people.
All right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, sadly, after this spiritual vision, the mother was informed by tearful Sister Margaret O'Connor that the child had been called home to God. because her heart had been unable to cope with the quote overwhelming joy of divine communion unquote. Oh
Hmm.
wait, what? The joy of divine communion causes one's body to go rigid and clench fists so tightly that she bleeds. I mean, according to Whitman, she was opened to the heavenly realms. So wouldn't God have known this would happen? What's the deal, God? I mean, come on. Was this just a prank?
Well, I often do that when I orgasm, so I don't see what they are worried about here. It all sounds natural to me.
Black fingernails and all, right?
Yeah.
Fine.
Well, let's not forget that in the beginning of all this, the narrator told us that the team of three was building the hospital to care for, quote, God's forgotten children. And I'm thinking, all right, what the hell? Like, if God is all powerful and what he says goes, wouldn't he kind of be irritated that they were stepping up to take care of humans that he would just as soon forget? I mean,
Right.
I hate to say it, but in this story at least, God is kind of the ultimate absentee father. Right? I mean, our Father who art in, hey, has anyone heard from him today?
Our Father, who art going to the corner store to buy a pack of cigarettes. Yay. Yeah, a deified deadbeat dad. Yep. Continuing, the mother was also informed that, quote, the child's body had been so transformed by holy light that it was no longer suitable for earthly viewing and had already been blessed and buried in the hospital's private cemetery behind the building. Unquote. Isn't that convenient? One-stop shopping for all your healing and dying needs.
They're nothing if not efficient, that's for sure.
Yep. It was here that the narrator's impatient sighs were starting to get to me. They happen at random moments and imply the narrator is as irritated with this story as I am. For example, the narrator says the mother's, quote, anguished screams echoed through the north end of that afternoon, unquote. I've heard this narrator pause to breathe several times in places where it demonstrates deep disgust with this story or the need for an oxygen tank, maybe.
The irony being that they can't get the period pauses right to save their proverbial lives. We can't get cohesion on sentence structure, so let's just add breathing mid-sentence to make it more realistic. Sounds good. Bravo, creators. Bravo.
I'm picturing like Grandpa reading a bedtime story from the easy chair, continually looking at the clock and the number of pages left and wishing to God the kid would just fall asleep already. Not that I've been there or anything.
Chaplain Sullivan swooped in to console this grieving mother by the consolation prize of her daughter being chosen for immediate sainthood. I don't think that's how it works. I think canonization can only be done by a pope and can only be done after the church undergoes rigorous investigation into a candidate's life, virtue, and miracles witnessed and verified by officials. The Vatican takes this process very, very seriously. So a priest would risk excommunication if they promised this to a congregant.
Well, and first he tells her the daughter's in heaven, quote, interceding for other sick children who needed healing, end quote. And so first, if I were her, I'd ask where that interceding was when she needed it. And second, I just want to say that when and if heaven comes for me, I hope to hell I'm not expected to move right away into the celestial workforce. Like, let me chill out on a cloud for a little while at least, okay?
Let me be for a little bit.
Yes.
Congratulations, you get to work
No pay.
for the rest of eternity.
Okay. But then we hear about a guy who emerged from the basement treatment fully cured of tuberculosis. And we learn that he would go on to live for another 37 years before peacefully dying at age 79. So even Stephen, right?
Yeah.
Led to the conclusion that this man lived because the child died. So is this the inverse of spare the rod, spoil the child? I mean, kill the child, spare the rod? I thought Roman Catholics are supposed to be pro-life.
Well, Mrs. O'Malley, whose husband had fully recovered, began noticing a pattern at the hospital. Patients either fully and miraculously recovered or they died. There were no partial healings, but the community's faith remained solid, quote, because the success stories were so dramatically visible. Cured patients walked through the neighborhood as living testimonies to divine intervention, while the deaths were explained as God's will, calling the pure souls home to heaven, unquote. Imagine any other business operating like this. What if half of the diners at a restaurant emerged proclaiming only the finest, most scrumptious cuisine, and the other half never emerging at all, their bodies quietly carried out through the back door and dropped into the dumpster? Meanwhile, those waiting to enter the restaurant are standing in line that extends several city blocks. I think at least the waste management workers would begin to question what the hell was going on in there.
I mean, it's like Japanese pufferfish restaurant with a
Uh,
Craigslist chef. Anyone?
Oh, yeah.
Anyone?
mhm.
Well, and then the narrator, he throws in the background, the backhanded compliment of these people who died that were characterized as, quote, those with the purest souls who were called home. And I'm thinking, so those walking around healed were what then? Like fixed, but still kind of dirty? I mean, gee, thanks a lot.
Aw.
I think I'd prefer that God took the assholes and left the good ones here on earth just a
Hmm.
little longer. But to continue, we are told that Chaplain Sullivan's preaching had gathered a congregation of over 400 people who crammed themselves into the expanded chapel and even overflowed into the treatment rooms. Now, hold on just a goddamn minute. If I was a patient in one of those rooms getting a pap smear, I'd not appreciate having to share that space with fanatical worshippers, not even a little.
It was nothing sacred, people. Nothing.
Ugh.
Nothing. All right. So the narrator informs us that Chaplain Sullivan's sermons were, quote, focused on themes of suffering, sacrifice, and divine testing, preparing families psychologically for the possibility that their loved ones might be chosen for heavenly service, unquote. So this isn't one of those happy clappy God is just so cool churches, more
Mhm.
that are really popular right now. It's more of like God is indifferent to your needs and suffering as long as it suits his purpose kind of church.
Mm,
Mm, got it.
yeah.
Um,
Yep.
on a side
Oh.
story, we had there's I will never forget. I was in 10th grade and we had a teacher. His name was Mr. Kasperick. He came in dressed as a deacon, in which
Huh.
he was an actual
Mm.
deacon. But he
Huh.
came in and gave us a fire and brimstone demonstration just so
Oh my
we would
God.
know what it was like.
Oh.
It was for something. It was one of the books that we were reading, and he wanted
Mm.
us to understand the intensity and how serious it was. And I don't even remember what the hell book we were reading, but I remember that sermon. It was
Wow.
definitely something.
Oh
Oh,
man.
gosh. Well, and and in this story, I have to wonder also about the psychological health of those who realized that the chaplain wasn't just preparing the congregation, that their loved ones might be called. That this chaplain was basically telling them, oh, by the way, your loved ones just might be called, and in fact, in their minds, they themselves could be hauled home at any given moment. So,
Mhm.
I don't. I would have a hard time walking around thinking that any minute I'm going to be struck down.
Right? Well, when a good thing works, why change it? I ask you.
Hmm.
Well, to transfer potential liability onto the patient seeking treatment rather than on the shoulders of those providing the treatment, of course. So, Dr. Whitman altered his methods by forcing patients to endure as much as 3 days of preparation before subjecting themselves for or submitting themselves to divine treatment. Patients were expected to fast and pray while being dosed with teas, which they were told had been blessed by bishops in Rome. That must have been some very stale tea, lukewarm and transported in whiskey kegs by ship from Italy, which could have taken as long as a month on a steamer ship and 3 to 4 months on a sail-powered ship. I can only imagine that the patients were utterly miserable by the time they were given the divine treatment, if they managed to survive the preparation at all, that is. And all of this was to, quote, make patients worthy of divine healing, unquote. This is such a dick move, in my opinion. They were told that any shortcuts and impure thoughts could prevent the miracle from happening. These people really suck.
Well, and take away the tea, and you're actually describing the wait time in most hospital emergency rooms if you've been there lately.
Oh, God, no kidding.
Yeah.
And of course, all of these miracles attracted the attention of wealthy Catholics who began donating to the hospital. They could have done this before, but they wanted to make sure they were going to get a good, solid return on their investment.
Mhm.
And this led Dr. Whitman to expand the basement to include what he called, quote, advanced sacred treatment chambers, unquote.
Mhm.
So, what had been delivered before was just basic, rate miracle healing.
Mhm.
But now he's offering premium, super marvelous healings.
Mm.
So the outcomes are presumably the same, but with added godliness for extra goodness, I'm sure.
But wait, there's more for 12 easy payments.
Oh, I love this part. It seems as though Joseph Smith, the founder of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, had a hand of sorts in this hospital expansion because Dr. Whitman installed, quote, specialized apparatus he claimed were designed according to divine blueprints revealed through prayer and meditation. I
Hmm.
wonder if you could only view those blueprints as long as you had your head inside of a hat and could they were at the bottom of the hat. So,
Uh, trust me, I'm a chaplain.
Dr. Samuel Richardson of Boston City Hospital had been quietly documenting the death certificates filed by St. Mercy General Hospital, and he noticed several disturbing anomalies. Imagine that.
Hmm.
mhm.
The causes of death listed on the certificates often didn't match the symptoms described by family members before treatment began. Patients who
Huh.
entered with consumption were listed as dying from heart failure. Children
Hmm.
brought in with broken bones were recorded as succumbing to brain fever. Most puzzling of
Hmm.
all, the time of death was always listed as occurring between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m.
Hmm.
Well, first the AI narrator strangely says between 2 more and 4 more a.m. So I'm not sure what that was all about.
Yeah, I believe it was a mini stroke. I believe it was a mini stroke.
Right. But also, don't pretty much all people die in a sense by heart failure? I mean, if I plummet off the roof of a 10-story building, I mean, sure, one can say that massive trauma, et cetera, led to my death, but it was really the heart stopping that sealed the deal. I'm just saying.
Right.
Fair enough.
Well, Dr. Richardson became more concerned when he attempted to examine some of the bodies of those who died at St. Mercy's when they were transferred to Flanagan's funeral home, which handled burials for poor families who couldn't afford more expensive arrangements. I'm confused by this because only a moment ago we were told that St. Mercy's had its own burial grounds located on the hospital property directly behind the building.
Mm,
And the hospital felt no qualms at all at preemptively burying the dead family members without the knowledge and consent of their loved ones. Why would they complicate this whole conspiracy by including local funeral homes?
right. It's definitely a really weird departure.
Hmm.
And Michael Flanagan, the funeral director, had been given strict instructions to refrain from opening the sealed coffins that arrived from St. Mercy's on account of preventing the spread of disease. Also,
Mm,
Flanagan acted surprised when the carters who'd brought the bodies only waited long enough to get the papers signed before quickly leaving.
Hmm.
And no, let's just make shit up for the sake of shadows going bump in the night. This is not how this works. By the 19th century, there were undertakers, the early form of funeral directors. They basically did the same kind of thing, but they were
Mhm.
responsible for the transport to the funeral home and then prepared the bodies. It was a one-person deal. They went and got
Mhm.
them. They brought them back. Even
Yep.
in poor Boston, the story is just making up magic shit now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, plus, if there was a concern about the potential for disease pouring out of the coffins, wouldn't the funeral director already know this? Like, if there was supposedly something going around to be careful of, I would think there would have been a few non-church folks who'd died of the same. And if not, wouldn't it be super suspicious that the only corpses coming from the church had to be in coffins that were hermetically sealed?
Right.
Mm.
Then the narrator tells us, quote, when Dr. Richardson attempted to discuss his concerns with the city health officials, he was told that St. Mercy General Hospital was under the protection of the Catholic Diocese of Boston and that any investigations would need to be authorized by the church authorities rather than civil government, unquote. And there it is. You know, I'm pretty sure that our First Amendment protections extend to ensure a separation between church and state, but not a separation between church and
Mhm.
accountability.
And again, I can't imagine a scenario where the church would be in charge of its own investigation,
Oh,
where the
no.
local authorities are told, never you mind. I mean, can you?
Uh huh.
No.
So I get that 150 years ago, if a private hospital wanted to pick and choose what they wanted to do or who to do it with, they had that right.
Yeah.
And they still have that right to some extent. Don't get me started. However, when you're talking about people dying in weird ways and it summons enough attention to be investigated, I don't think the my religion, my business gets to play a card.
No. No, they don't. We learn that the local bishop frequently praises Dr. Whitman's blend of science and divine healing, and launching an investigation into the hospital would be seen as the secular government attacking the Catholic Church. But I got the impression earlier that during this time period, attacking the Catholic Church was considered just a leisurely pastime. What gives with the sudden reticence against Catholic bashing?
Okay, where are those Protestants now?
Right? Come on.
In the meantime, quote, Miss Catherine Ali meant O'Malley. It's an AI typo of a typo if you look at the transcripts. They messed it all up. Had been conducting her own informal investigation motivated by memories of the young Bridget McCarthy's terrifying final moments. Miss O'Malley discovered that every family whose loved one had died at St. Mercy described the same set of symptoms prior to their death: violent seizures that lasted exactly 13 minutes, blackened fingernails, and a sweet, rotting smell that clung to their clothes for weeks after death.
Hmm.
I have several questions about these symptoms, but Kenny, can you do the honor?
Why, thank you, dear. I certainly will. First of all, who pulls out a stopwatch when someone goes into a seizure? Also, why would they keep the clothing? I mean, if it reeks that bad, why not just allow the person to be buried in them? But if they insisted on keeping those clothes, why not wash them? The only other explanation would be that the family might have brought the body home and let it lie around for a few weeks. And to this, I would respond, of course it's going to stink. Did you expect otherwise?
There's a lot about the details in that summary that stinks, I'll tell you, and
Oh,
no amount of Febreze can hide it either.
yes.
Yeah.
Worse than stinky clothing or the prolonged seizures, the narrator informs us uh, were what the family members said before dying. We're told that their loved ones babbled in languages no one understood, reciting mathematical equations and chemical formulas in voices that didn't sound human. Hang on a second. How would they know that they were spewing mathematical equations and chemical formulas if they were speaking in a language no one understood? Did they just assume this? Why? And one woman described how her husband spent his final hour repeating the same set of numbers, 7 numbers, over and over, pausing exactly 30 seconds, again with the stopwatch, and repeating them again in exactly the same order.
I'm imagining this entire town walking around with pocket watches that they whip out whenever anything outside the norm happens. A seizure, a man counting, an old woman trying to remember where she parked her wagon. It's like they may all feel like mathematical equations are gibberish and impossible to understand, but they sure know time.
We are given several more examples of dying people doing annoying shit like the above examples, each displaying how someone demonstrated knowledge that they never had while they were well. And again, the weird damn phrases and the Max Hedron glitchy shit from the AI
Yeah.
narrator.
Yes.
Testimonies from Sarah Murphy, Thomas Kelly, and Elizabeth Cowley. She who pulls no punches when talking about her husband.
Sean was never an educated man, like the AI narrator's having occasional, like 1.5-second seizures of his own. She goes on. He could barely write his own name, but in his final hours, he was speaking perfect Latin.
Kick the man while he's down, Elizabeth. Damn.
All right.
Oh man, just when Mrs. O'Malley thought she was uncovering evidence of something sinister, she would encounter one of the miracle patients whose recovery was so complete and dramatic that it challenged her own growing suspicions. Her own husband, Patrick, remained perfectly good health with lung capacity that surpassed men half his age, that bastard. He was flagrantly flaunting his robust health and refusing to support his wife's in her pursuit of evidence to support her increasing paranoia. Damn him.
And so we're just revisiting the beginning of the story again. Come on, folks. We've done this before.
Yep.
Well, I know that I walk around our local gym imagining which guys in there have the biggest lung capacity. Honestly, if I were her, I'd have called him an outlier in the data and just been done with it.
Yes. Her big-lunged husband, along with other success stories, were impossible to dismiss, creating a maddening paradox that bolstered the community's faith in St. Mercy's Hospital, despite the evidence that something was obviously wrong.
And one does not negate the other. There's a reason fen-phen was banned. It was great for weight loss, bad for killing people.
I disagree, Nikki. Fen-phen was actually very effective at killing people.
This is true.
They were definitely lighter when they buried them, but
Yes.
but then comes the blizzard.
Oh, God. And unusually harsh blizzard trapped Boston under 4 feet of snow for nearly 2 weeks during the winter of 1880. But instead of spending their nights huddled in their homes struggling to stay warm, several people decided to survey the happenings around the hospital. What is it with people choosing to spend freezing nights staring at buildings in these stories? Nearly every video we've reviewed has described this identical behavior.
Well, in this case, they're all out there with their stopwatches, don't forget, timing to the second every single thing they can see. The length of time for Mr. Mackenzie to walk from his outhouse to the front door, the number of seconds it takes for the average snowflake to fall from one point to the ground, and how long it takes old Miss Carson to still find where she parked that damn wagon.
Yes.
In this video, the neighbors reported seeing lights in the basement at all hours of the night. In 4 feet of snow. In a basement. Gotcha. Mind you, this was not candlelight, gas, or oil light. No. Quote, but the flickering colored illumination that shifted between green, blue, and deep purple. When the storm finally ended and normal operations resumed, 17 patients had been receiving treatment during the blizzard were reported to having ascended to heavenly glory during the sacred storm. From this description, I can only conclude that those patients danced themselves to death.
Yes.
It's not the worst way to go, but not ideal, perhaps. And the people reporting were pissed because they didn't get invited to the rave.
Tap that bass, black fingernails, and house music and all. I mean, if it wasn't for that lingering stench we heard about, I'd be the first in line.
And why, in God's name, would the blizzard be called a sacred storm? 17 people died, potentially from electrocution if the disco lights in the basement were poorly wired. It just seems weird to me that the AI author thought the bad news to a bunch of families would be softened by adding the word sacred to an ordinary storm. I don't think I'd have a better reaction if I were to find out that my house had been destroyed by a sacred tornado. I might actually be more pissed.
By that reasoning, I just start preceding every malady with the word sacred. I'm sorry, my dear, but it appears the roast has been sacredly overcooked and the milk has gone divinely sour.
To continue, the narrator tells us, quote, the spring of 1881 brought us an unexpected visitor to St. Mercy General Hospital who would forever change the course of events, unquote. Okay. I need to talk about this claim seen so often in schlocky documentaries or books where the author is barely mailing it in. Every action forever changes the courses of events. Can we all agree on that? Just as every inaction forever changes the course of events. In no way can anyone prevent themselves from changing the course of events because that's how time and space works. I want to retire this turn of phrase because it contributes nothing. It's just filler. I don't know why this kind of lazy description really bugs me, but it does. Even ineffective action has impact.
And I want to add to that the constant qualifier of, quote, more than this long list of horrible things I just told you, the thing that troubled our heroine the most was, and then insert some kind of lame thing that's nowhere near as bad as the other things they just listed.
Right. It reminds me of someone describing how a waiter accidentally spilled a bowl of soup, boiling soup on someone, causing massive third-degree burns that resulted in multiple surgeries and skin grafts. And the person listening to the story asks, "What kind of soup?"
Right. Well, that harbinger of change, which the AI author ham-handedly introduced earlier before this record derailed completely, was Father Giuseppe Benedetti, who, quote, arrived from the Vatican's Congregation for the Causes of Saints sent to investigate the miraculous healings that had been reported to the church authorities in Rome.
So wait, so who among the players we've already been introduced to is going tattling to the Pope? I mean, so far everyone has been pretty much just meh, or at most furrowed brow and concerned like Susan Collins about everything.
But this father was nobody's fool. He wasn't about to just accept whatever the locals readily embraced as evidence of miracles. Nope, he was a skeptic, damn it. He took a methodical, almost scientific approach even to evaluating claimed miracles. His 15 years of investigating had allowed him to develop techniques to discern between bona fide miracles and elaborate hoaxes. Father Benedetti is described as a small, quiet man in his early 60s with keen gray eyes and a way of speaking that compelled people to tell him the complete truth. Father Benedetti was also schooled in chemistry and anatomy while attending the University of Bologna and also had extensive knowledge in medical science.
Wow. So basically he's the papal version of the professor on Gilligan's Island, right? So ain't nothing gonna get past this brilliant man of the cloth.
We're good. We're saved.
Oh, we're not.
Yeah.
By the way, the professor never did actually have a name other than the professor. Anyway, Dr. Whitman enthusiastically welcomed Father Benedetti and offered him complete access to patient records, HIPAA laws, schmippa laws, and treatment facilities. We have nothing to hide from God's representative, he declared expansively.
Yeah, aside from all the redactions.
Oh.
However, Miss O'Malley just happened to be present when the Vatican rep showed up, and she noticed that Dr. Whitman's hands trembled slightly when shaking the priest's hand. Is this woman now stalking the hospital full time? Is she somehow part of the delegation from the Vatican? I mean, I get this feeling this is the one that chases fire trucks. She's definitely part of the inquiring minds want to know crowd.
Oh
She's
God, yeah.
the 19th century Boston hybrid of Angela Lansbury and Mrs. Kravitz.
Yes, yes. Well, Father Benedetti wasted no time on getting to work. He examined the patient files and noticed that the notes regarding the patient's presenting condition were very detailed. However, the notes after treatment were sparse. Basically, cured and discharged. Praise the Lord. I have no idea if this is abnormal because I'm not a representative from the Vatican able to review private personal medical information without patient consent. However, I'm thinking that other than maybe recording vital signs at discharge, I don't think there would be much need for more, at least at a busy hospital back in the 19th century, right?
Mm.
And from personal experience, I can say that there is a whole lot of write up about what your problem is, like the 5 W's and all. And then
Hmm.
the follow up afterward is literally healing well.
Mm.
Hmm.
Now, it does get to me, and what I think the narrator might be trying to get at is that the middle is missing. So,
Ah,
what the doctor did, medical part of the medical record, is very detailed in what goes on during the case, and the outcome is, if especially if the outcome is less than stellar.
yeah.
As someone who occasionally had to transcribe a doctor's medical notes, more than once I had to ask, "What is this?" And it wasn't only because of her terrible handwriting. It was I didn't understand what she was saying.
Yeah, yeah.
So basically, he should just be glad that there was anything more than just a big red stamp reading discharged.
Yes,
Yes.
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
So the Vatican rep decided to interview some of these miraculously healed patients and discovered that many of them had left Boston without the courtesy of leaving a forwarding address.
Hurrah. It's like they're just trying to outrun those pesky Valpak mailings, I'm sure.
Then there were the patients who squandered their newly attained perfect health to up and die for unrelated reasons. Those he did manage to find and interview described their memory gaps when they trying to recall the miracle treatments.
Well, to be fair, I got some memory gaps after getting my colonoscopy, so I understand.
Yeah, me too.
Thankfully.
Yes.
Some things you don't want to know.
Yes. The narrator provides us with a first person account. Quote, "It's the strangest thing, Father. One patient named Michael Sullivan admitted, I remember Sister Margaret giving me some tea that tasted like bitter almonds, and then everything becomes fuzzy. I had dreams, at least I think they were dreams, of floating above my body and watching men in white coats doing things to me I couldn't quite see clearly. When
Mm.
I woke up, I could move my legs again, better than before the accident. But sometimes I have nightmares about being in a place that was both very hot and very cold at the same time, and hearing voices speaking in languages I didn't understand," unquote.
Yeah. Ugh. It sounds like the morning after where someone maybe should have kept a better eye on his drink the night before and what someone might have dropped into it.
Yes.
Um, Interestingly enough, according to the National Library of Medicine, these are also symptoms of cyanide poisoning.
Mm.
Mm.
I'm probably on a list right now because I did some looking. I did quite a bit of looking, actually.
Look out, Nick.
Yeah, and all of the symptoms, which was interesting, but all of the symptoms, right down to heart arrhythmia and the black or blue fingertips, which is called cyanosis, are
Mm.
included. So if you smell bitter almonds, GTFO. Well, by the time you smell it, it's probably too late, but still.
Sure.
Yeah, at least have that intention. Come on. Holy shit. Well, that got unexpectedly dark all of a sudden. Nice work, Nikki. But I shouldn't be surprised that artificial intelligence would confuse healing with poisoning. Then Father Benedetti requested to witness one of the sacred treatment sessions. At first, Dr. Whitman agreed, but backtracked by laying out the same sort of ridiculous purification rites that patients were expected to perform. On top of that, the Vatican's representative would be required to swear a vow of silence regarding what he had witnessed. And quote, unusually, he would need to consume the same sanctifying substances given to patients to ensure his spiritual worthiness to witness a divine healing, unquote. And I gotta say, this just occurred to me just now. Why, for him to understand this experience, would he have to actually subject himself to the treatment?
Oh my God.
What would that prove?
Hi, I know we just met, but I want to tell you something really super secret, but you have to swear not to tell anyone. But first, drink this stuff right here, and it's going to be amazing, I promise. Okay.
Nothing shady here.
Oh, God.
As you may have guessed, this was too much for Father Benedetti. He'd never
Yeah.
been confronted by restrictions for witnessing divine interventions. In particular, he objected to having ingest any chemical substances. The cyanide Kool-Aid? Yeah, that.
Uh-huh.
Father Benedetti began to grow more suspicious of Dr. Whitman and his methodology.
Well, imagine that. So the Vatican rep decided to engage in some cloak and dagger style investigation. He enlisted the ever-present help of Catherine O'Malley. Catherine had impressed the father with her inability to mind her own business. The two of them performed surveillance on the hospital and discovered several clandestine activities, especially in the early hours of the morning. Deliveries of crates marked with medieval symbols mostly used in the practice of alchemy. Jars of liquid which ranged in colors from clear to purple. Equipment deliveries that resembled laboratory equipment rather than intended for any medical purpose. And most disturbingly, visits from well-dressed businessmen productively carrying leather satchels and meeting with Dr. Whitman privately in his office. How dare they? Do you guys think any of this looks sinister? I really don't, honestly.
I chalk it up. I chalk the first part up to just filler Dr. Jekyll bullshit, and the latter to rich hospital donors wanting to make sure that their investment is performing well.
Yeah.
So somehow, Catherine Alley or O'Malley or what's her name, she gets a hold of the original blueprints for the building and finds that the basement had been substantially expanded. Now, this would not be easy and super hard to hide.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and not to mention, we already discussed the fact that they added on when the rich Catholics started donating. So the original blueprints don't mean jack if they've already added on.
Right. And wasn't the back of the building filled with dead, buried bodies? If the building was positioned like most of them in that era, the front of would have been butted up against the sidewalk in order to be able to use every bit of available space for storing textile equipment, supplies, and machinery.
And also, I can't imagine there'd be much free space on either side of the property, since I don't think property easements were like really a thing back then. So
No.
anyway, at some point, someone would have to have seen the cemetery getting dug up and wagon loads of cement being poured. But then, what do I know?
We don't look too deep at the gaping logical mishaps. Although there are many, so many.
Yes.
Talk about it.
We are told that Father Benedetti had a breakthrough in the revelations from the seamstress named Molly Flanagan, whose home was directly across the alley behind the hospital. She described seeing men carrying bodies wrapped in canvas that still twitched as they put them in the wagons. She told him about substances being burned in barrels that emitted green smoke. She also described hearing screaming coming from underground that didn't sound human. I'm trying to figure out which of these was the breakthrough. Any clues, guys?
And I'm wondering why, if she really observed this, she waited so long to say something about it. So, no, Father, nothing out of the. Well, actually, now that you mention it.
Father Benedetti arranged to spend several nights at Molly's shop in order to observe the hospital's rear activities through her window. He saw Dr. Whitman, Sister Margaret O'Connor, and two other unknown men in white coats emerge from the back of the hospital carrying a box the size of a coffin. He could hear tapping coming from inside the coffin, which was loaded onto a wagon. Somehow, the Vatican rep intuited that they had driven the wagon to the harbor district, and then afterwards returned 3 hours later with an empty wagon.
And I just want to interject here. So he's across the alley watching through a window, which I assume is closed, and he hears a quote, tapping coming from inside the coffin. So unless the guy has like bionic hearing, I'm calling total BS. And anyway, after witnessing what was clearly the disposing of a not quite dead body, he does nothing at all until he watches a well-dressed man trade a leather satchel for a small glass vial filled with dark liquid. And only now has he seen enough. Dumping like kind of dead people into the harbor was one thing, but exchanging a leather accessory for a glass vial, hold on.
Yeah, that's too far.
Yes.
Okay, so Dr. Benedetti decided to break into the hospital's basement to gather definitive proof of whatever illegal activities he assumed were taking place. Not the, watching dead bodies and mysterious handoffs or anything like that.
No.
No. 5 nights after casually witnessing an obvious murder, the father broke through the basement window at the rear of the building. In the rear of the building, where the people came out of and disposed of said bodies and had deliveries 3 nights a week, right? And
Yes.
while in there, he discovered all the stuff that normally is described in the videos of this type.
You mean the body parts preserved in glass jars?
Why, yes. However, these jars were connected to electrical components. There were an abundance of notes describing the reactions to various substances applied to various patients. He found notes remarking on patients' newfound intellectual abilities, such as reading or speaking languages they'd been previously ignorant about, or performing complex mathematical formulations. At this point, I realized that this video was, again, how evil science contaminates religious practices.
But then the narrator drones on for several minutes about all the horrors the father had discovered in that basement, and it's such a laundry list of recap details that I found myself drifting off. The only halfway interesting thing was the discovery that Dr. Whitman was actually, quote, and bear with me on this, Dr. Klaus Weissmann, a German physician who had been expelled from the University of Heidelberg, or Heidelberg University for you humans, for conducting unauthorized human experiments, unquote.
Yes.
He also learned that Sister Margaret O'Connor was actually Margaret Osborne, a former nurse who had been dismissed from London Hospital for stealing morphine and falsifying patient records, which is way worse than the mad scientist bullshit
Right?
above. But Chaplain Robert Sullivan was Robert Steinberg, who had never been ordained as a priest, but had learned to conduct convincing religious services during a stint as a confidence man in Philadelphia.
They're liars. They're all liars.
Yes. We are told that Father Benedetti used a camera to snap pictures of the evidence, but there is no way in hell he would have been able to do this. The first hand or detective camera wasn't invented until 1888. And even the so-called travel camera was a bulky affair with expanded bellows to adjust focus and requiring both a tripod and an external flash implement. Also, the pictures it created were huge. The plates on this picture would be 13 by 18 centimeters or 18 by 23 centimeters. He's just about have to port around an entire photography studio just to gather evidence.
Well, and I'm imagining the lightning bolt like flashes of the bulb and the plumes of smoke. I mean, totally easy to do without being seen, right?
Yes, yes.
Pay no attention to the fire over there.
Yeah, yeah. And while taking pictures of the most damning evidence with this small 15-poundish camera, dramatic tension finally ensues. The following is a dramatic reading more than AI can muster. He heard footsteps on the basement stairs and realized his investigation was about to be discovered. The truth was now within his grasp, but he would need to escape alive to expose the horrifying conspiracy that had claimed 213 innocent lives under the guise of divine healing. Father Benedetti extinguished his small oil lamp and pressed himself against the wall behind the filing cabinets as footsteps descended the basement stairs. And
And again, none of them says, "Hey, do you guys smell smoke?"
We are treated to an exposition dump at this point. Dr. Whitman complains that the Vatican investigator was getting too close in a voice with heavy Germanic pronunciation. He complained that Benedetti had been asking questions about patients he was unable to interview, and worried about Benedetti discovering the basement's operations. We hear that this operation had taken 16 years to build and would be destroyed, causing European contracts to be terminated.
Okay, so, and then there's a woman that Benedetti doesn't recognize speaking with a crisp British accent in response to Dr. Whitman's concerns. And because she's British, you know she's an authority of some kind, right?
Of course.
So she addresses the man as Dr. Weissman and right away degrades his emotional attachment to the Irish immigrant community as a liability. She says that the people have served the purpose simply by providing the syndicate documentation from 213 test subjects. So supposedly this pharmaceutical data was worth over $400,000 in European markets or something. And then she nearly goes full Cruella de Vil by ending her speech with a maniacal, cruel laugh.
Uh, yes.
after hearing this perfectly staged conversation, Benedetti realized that the conversation was between the two masterminds who had perpetrated, quote, the most elaborate medical fraud in American history, unquote.
Yeah. Just wait 150 years, Benedetti. You have no idea.
Yeah.
After describing how the research performed at St. Mercy Hospital was benefiting pharmaceutical companies or manufacturers across Europe, the woman launched into an insulting soliloquy of the genius involved in exploiting religious adherents. She explains that the immigrants are ignorant and desperate and unwilling to question what appeared to be miraculous healing. Quote, the Irish immigrants have been ideal test subjects, isolated from the mainstream medical community, trusting of authority figures, and unlikely to be missed when they don't survive the procedures. And the survivors become unwitting testimonials of our legitimacy. Unquote.
You know, it's always with the people who shan't be missed by anyone, and yet they get missed. And then, like when Dr. Whitman asks what to do about Benedetti, the woman brushes his anxiety aside and directs the doctor to kill the Vatican's representative. Excuse me, British lady, but he might be missed by the Pope, no less.
That's something. At this point in the conversation, Father Benedetti, quote, realized he had perhaps 12 hours to gather evidence, escape from the hospital, and alert the authorities before becoming the 214th victim of this monstrous conspiracy. But instead of just waiting until the couple had moved out of earshot, like any sane person, he chose to move toward the basement window through which he had entered. Of course, in comic relief, of course, his foot struck a metal container, and the clatter of
Oops.
which echoed through the stone basement chambers.
Curses.
I'm surprised that he didn't fall down a flight of stairs and trip on a banana as
or
well.
or stumble across the room with his foot stuck in the bucket, right? As
Yes.
Exactly.
clank, clank, clank.
After a moment of silence, Dr. Whitman's voice calmly called out, quote, Father Benedetti, there's no need to continue hiding. We know you're down there. We know exactly what you've discovered. Why don't you come upstairs so that we can discuss this situation like civilized people?
Oh shit. This totally reminds me of the video we reviewed some time ago with the social worker hiding in the basement and being discovered by the creepy blind woman. Like, learn to hide better, people.
Right? Oh, God.
Wasn't that the teacher that puked off the roof?
Oh, right. Yeah. They tend to blur into one another.
Yeah. Father Benedetti made a break for the window he used earlier. Quote, clutching the photographs and documents he had gathered as evidence, he moved quickly towards the basement window, praying his aging body could still move with the agility his desperate situation required, unquote.
Clutching the photographs. So, now, wait a second. When did Polaroid instant cameras get invented again?
Right? Remember, dear listener, these photographs would have been actual plates made of what was called japanned iron or tin or glass. The images on those plates would be photo negatives that only later could be imprinted on paper or copper daguerreotypes. He'd also be carrying a very heavy camera, which was most likely made of wood.
Well, no wonder they found him with all that massive photo development lab in full operation behind them. I mean, my God, with all that stuff to carry, running around, running away would have been impossible, much less escaping through a window.
However, he did manage to escape.
And I know I'm dating myself here, but I'm picturing the scene of him escaping with all that gear to the tune of yakety sax.
Later that morning, a raid ensued on St. Mercy Hospital, which uncovered evidence that exceeded even Father Benedetti's worst expectations. In the basement laboratory, investigators discovered a hidden sub-basement containing preservation tanks filled with human organs and correspondence with buyers throughout Europe who purchased biological specimens for research purposes.
But wait, there's more.
The conspiracy wasn't limited to pharmaceutical testing. They also engaged in harvesting organs from deceased patients in order to sell them to medical schools and research facilities which didn't scruple about the source.
Yeah, well, fortunately, though, all the key suspects in this case were quickly apprehended and apparently confessed to everyone what they knew about everything. I mean, the entire global conspiracy kit and caboodle that stretched for like 3 continents. They sang like canaries, they did. Today's syndicate criminals just need to grease the palms of some politicians or maybe secure enough dirt on them to keep everyone quiet, but not then, apparently.
No. These 3 just unloaded all the dirt regarding the syndicate, which had been operating for 2 decades. I'm not sure if they all died of assisted suicide while in prison, but maybe that was not yet in vogue.
So, I think all they had to do was let a couple flea-bitten rats loose in there and be done with it.
During the aftermath of this case, the narrator claims that major changes were instituted regarding testing pharmaceutical drugs. However, my Google search is ignorant of those regulations and only could come up with the very first regulation, which was the 1909 Biologics Control Act, passed to ensure the safety and purity of serums and vaccines. 10 years after the supposed happenings at St. Mercy Hospital. And it wasn't until the 1960s, folks, that the Food and Drug Administration and the, let me read that again. During the aftermath of this case, the narrator claims that major changes were instituted regarding testing of pharmaceutical drugs. However, my Google search is ignorant of those regulations and only could come up with the very first regulation, which was the 1902 Biologics Control Act. passed to ensure the safety and purity of serums and vaccines. 10 years after the supposed happenings at St. Mercy's Hospital. And it wasn't until the 1960s, folks, that Food and Drug Administration implemented strict, updated regulations over investigational new drugs and preclinical studies. So, effectively, until relatively recently, drug development was operated with as much oversight as the Wild West during the California Gold Rush.
And
Hmm.
I was shocked, at least in the U.S., after they had found out about H.H. Holmes selling bodies
Oh, yeah.
of in the body parts of the people they killed. Surely there had to have been laws that were passed about that.
Hmm.
And no, you are correct, ma'am. The Uniform Anatomical Gift Act was implemented in 1968, and before that was the Anatomy Act, which was in 1832, but that was to curb grave robbing by allowing the use of unclaimed bodies for research. So
Yep,
if you were just a
Hmm.
Joe Schmo, they just took your body and used it for research.
Hmm.
So it was
exactly.
indeed the wild, wild west of dead people.
Oh,
Hmm.
absolutely. And the video ends by claiming that this case was further studied to better understand how blind faith in authority figures, as well as supernatural healing, ultimately led to the deaths of 213 people over a 16-year operation of the hospital. And honestly, I don't see that much has changed,
Hmm.
especially
Hmm.
since quite recently the FDA has been nearly fully defunded, and cigarettes are now considered less dangerous than Tylenol.
Yes. Well, I'll be watching for human-sized boxes being carried out in the middle of the night in the alley
Hmm.
behind the Health and Human Services building and listening for the tapping of mostly but not quite dead occupants inside.
Hmm.
Hmm.
So, Warren and Nikki, after listening to this video, what is actually different today than what was described in this video we reviewed? I need reassurance that history isn't not actually in the process of repeating itself.
Well, I'd like to think that if I were hiding out in a basement or a sub-basement watching nefarious goings on, I'd have a decent shot at getting photos of RFK Jr. and Kid Rock with my cell phone and not get caught.
Yeah, very, very possible. Yes. For me, two things to take home in particular. One, the amount of social media Karens demanding cancel culture would wreak havoc
Hmm.
on the systematic murder of people once it was indeed found. The problem with finding it out and believing it is something else. Uh,
Yes.
we may have many examples of how long it takes for things to be exposed and corrected. It happens because normal people are for the most part good and have a moral compass.
Hmm.
And two, the comments in this story give me hope. There are
Ah,
more than a few that call bullshit on this story, and or if not calling bullshit, they can at least extrapolate the meaning behind the story rather than the literal. And
oh,
that gives
good.
me huge hope.
Oh,
Hmm.
yeah, yeah. Well, something that I'm taking away is the fact that it can take decades, many decades, for us to have good laws implemented in order to protect the public, but it can take less than a year for everything to be torn down, as we
Hmm.
found
Right.
out.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, that does it for our review of 213 victims in 16 years. What really happened at St. Mercy Hospital. I'd like to thank you, Warren, for pausing packing your luggage long enough to participate in this record. And I want to
Hmm.
thank you, Nikki, for your efforts to go all Mother Teresa on every equine in the state of Michigan. I would also like to thank my husband, Cooney, for doing the editing of our videos. Get it right this time, honey, or it's the dirty sock and closet time for you. And finally, I want to thank our listeners, subscribers, and everyone else who made it this far in the video without sending me any death threats. Look for more content to be uploaded on this channel in the coming weeks. But until then, I hope all of you have a wonderful day.